So here we are in our dry farm tomatoes. I wanted to cover a little bit about how we plant them and what the start of the process is. So you'll see the tomatoes have been planted now, and you can see there's a line of drip tape on, which I'll explain about in just a minute. What we did to get them to this point is basically we just trenched out a large trench with our tractor using those same Alabama shovels that we use for so many of our operations. A shovel that comes to a point but has a flat top. It doesn't have high sides. So it kicks some soil out but allows a lot of loose soil to come over the back of it. That allows us to have a really nice planting trench. And from there, we just have our dry farm tomato starts that are rather large, maybe a foot tall at some parts, and we plant them as deep as we can. Tomatoes, like many plants, are adventitious rooters, which means that if any part of the stem gets covered with soil, it will start to grow roots from that point and kind of give it an even more robust root system. So we plant them as deep as we can, and then depending on the scenario, if we'd had a winter where we had a lot of rain and we were maybe able to pre-irrigate the fields, or we had the right moisture in the field, we could just plant these tomatoes into that moisture and walk away and be done with it. And that would be a truly dry farmed crop. These days, when sometimes our winter rainfall is below what we think we need to be able to pull off a dry farm crop, we'll go ahead and put down a line of drip tape. And when we establish the plant, we'll put down maybe an inch of water. For us, that's 4 hours with our drip lines. So put down a couple hours worth of water right at planting, and then we'll remove these drip lines and let the plants go from there. The next step in this process for us is, because of how tall these plants are, I'll come through with the Lilliston cultivator and just lightly rake this soil in around the plants. So that we give them a little bit more stability on their stem. But really the most important thing is that we're actually going to smother out any weeds that will germinate in the furrows here. Because we had put down so much water, my guess is that, in a scoop or two of soil, I would not be surprised if I didn't find what we have here, which is a number of weeds already starting to germinate. And so by using the Lilliston cultivator and now pulling this dry soil and smothering the plant, or hugging the plant, we'll then be smothering the weeds so they won't be able to push through that loose soil. And that'll help us keep a really clean crop, especially when we're not going to have to irrigate again. Hey folks, so here we are in the dry farm tomatoes. So these tomatoes now are at probably it's probably about day 14. So again, just a reminder, we put these in the ground, planted them into the trench that we made with the tractor, and then we watered them with an inch of water just because we had kind of limited rainfall this year. And then we took the drip lines off and we won't water them again. And as you can see, the plants are responding really well. We see a lot of nice green growth. Stems are getting strong, and now it's time for us to come through and hill the dry farms. So what we're looking at here is that, again, because we made this deep trench, there was moisture in the trench when we dug, and then we put that irrigation down after planting. We have found some weeds that are germinating from the surface here. And that's what we want to take care of right now. So the hilling process, we're going to drive through with our Lilliston cultivators. That's going to grab this loose soil on either side and throw it around the plant. And in the process, it's going to go ahead and smother these weeds. It'll even kill some of the smaller weeds that are in these hills. That'll be pretty much our only weed pass for the entire season. Because these are dry farm tomatoes, we won't irrigate them again, so we shouldn't germinate any new weeds. So doing this loose pass of cultivation really is all that we need to do. We'll just do 2 passes on each of these rows to get a nice solid hill. The other reason that this is really important for dry farm tomatoes is that any compaction that we develop in the soil, again, whether it's just from planting or driving the tractor or even walking with our feet, we want to slowly break up that compaction, because creating the loose soil on top, having loosely aggregated soil around the tomatoes, is going to prevent any evaporation from the soil profile. And so where we have tomatoes that we really want to get as much moisture as possible, without adding extra on. This way of kind of loosely working the top of the soil is going to be really important to trap that moisture lower down in the soil. And one way to think about it is, this is kind of like a soil or a dust mulch. Right, so the same way that you would put a straw mulch on top of a field to keep the moisture from evaporating off the surface, loosely cultivating this dry soil on top is going to do the same thing for us here. All right, so now we've done 2 passes with our Lilliston cultivator to hill our dry farm tomatoes, and this is going to be the result right here. So you see our tomatoes are no longer in that trench. We've hilled up quite a bit of soil. Probably about that much soil has all gotten pushed up onto these plants. This will help give them a little bit of support too, especially you can see how much wind we have today. This will help support those tomatoes as they're growing before we get a chance to trellis them. And over here, again, this is what they looked like before they got hilled. So I'll be doing this pass next. Again, covering this tomato plant, about up to here with soil, and we'll let them go from there. Hey folks, we are back in our dry farm tomatoes here, so just wanted to check in and see how they're growing. These dry farm tomatoes are, again, about 50 days from planting at this point. You can see that the plants have grown quite a bit in stature. Again, when we planted these, because we had a relatively dry winter, we put 2 inches of water down to establish the plants, and then we haven't watered them since. So it's been almost 2 months, no water. And again, you look at these plants and you're really hard pressed to find signs of water stress. Again, this is the tomato plant. This seed in particular has been bred and selected in dry farm conditions, probably that happened probably upwards of 10 years ago. We've saved seed from plants that we planted, again, grown in dry farm conditions for the last 3 years. So these plants are quite adapted to these conditions, and you can see the difference, right, in a plant that's been selected and bred in that environment versus trying to dry farm another plant that hasn't been bred that way. It's not going to hold up the same way. If you can look back at the last row of tomatoes there that has the stakes on it, those curled leaves, that's water stress right there. And those are heirloom tomatoes that can handle some dry farming, but they're not holding up quite as well as these dry farms that are really bred in these conditions. Again, the last kind of tractor operation that we did on this, and the last one that we will do, is this gentle hilling around the plants. So we just threw a little bit of soil, again, after that initial irrigation to smother any weeds in row. You can see around these plants, again, there's virtually no weeds. So this is a combination of that hilling technique that was so successful in some of our other crops. It's successful in corn and successful in potatoes. But in this situation, when you hill and you continue to not water, you really get good weed control. So, if I look over there at that next row over, I can see a little bindweed in the kind of coming out of the mound. And, that's a plant that is kind of so strong in dry conditions because it comes up from so deep down in the soil where there's moisture. There's nothing we can do about that. But again, this is the type of weed control that we'd want to see in this dry farm tomato field. We're starting to see the initial fruit set on these tomatoes. So, we'll have some fruit pretty soon. And this variety of tomato is rather upright. It's really nice for trellising. And you can see we're starting to set up our stakes now. And we'll start trellising these tomatoes to kind of hold them tight and give them some support to grow really tall. They'll probably end up at about 5 feet, and we'll pick the fruit off of the trellis. We could have trellised these or began trellising these probably a month ago. But it's one of those things that because this plant is so upright, and because we can kind of make up for it, and we've got so many other things to do, we'll get to it a little bit late and that will be okay. Hey everybody, back here in the dry farms for the last time. Again, we're just over about 100 days on this crop. And since the last time we checked them out, we've put our T-posts in and trellised these up. This specific variety is a very upright variety, so it works really well to trellis them. You know, we could probably put another line on here just to support them as they go up and hang that fruit off. But we've been harvesting for a couple weeks now. You can see these plants are really kind of loaded with different stages of fruit. And these tomatoes are ready to pick. This one's got a little crack in it, but yeah, this field's performing well for us. So again, being dry farmed, it's amazing to see how much growth and vigor these plants still have. They haven't seen water since the very first time we planted them, but really heavy fruit load, really strong growth, and very little weed pressure because no water and no weeds.